Hello and welcome to the Dailies. Ukraine peace efforts remained in the spotlight with fragile diplomacy and conflicting claims, underscoring how far a negotiated end to the war still is. The Middle East also stayed firmly in focus after Israel moved to bar dozens of humanitarian organizations from operating in Gaza, prompting international concern over worsening civilian conditions. Beyond the immediate crises, news coverage was dominated by end-of-year roundups and forward-looking analyses as governments, markets and analysts weighed unresolved conflicts and economic uncertainty heading into 2026. International media continued to focus on the effort to end the war in Ukraine after Putin accused Ukraine of targeting his residents. The New York Times conducted an extensive investigation tracing how President Trump's promise to end the Ukraine war quickly unraveled into a year of erratic diplomacy. The analysis talks about secret back channels with Moscow, internal feuds among Trump aides, and also repeated U.S. delays in supplying Ukraine with vital weapons. It contends also that Trump overestimated his leverage over Vladimir Putin, while U.S. intelligence quietly helped Ukraine strike Russian infrastructure. The piece underscores a fractured alliance shaped by mistrust, mixed signals, and missed opportunities. The Washington Post published an in-depth report painting a stark picture of a Russia worn down by nearly 4 years of war. The piece indeed reveals a society under strain marked by wounded soldiers, economic fatigue, repression, and growing resentment, even though the Kremlin projects unity and strength. The piece also shows how prolonged conflict is affecting daily life, underscoring a widening gap between propaganda and reality. The Wall Street Journal examines what lies ahead for Ukraine once the war ends, arguing that battlefield success may create difficult post-war choices. The analysis highlights how Ukraine will possess Europe's largest and most experienced military, yet face steep financial and manpower pressures. It points to expert warnings that sustaining such a force is unrealistic, pushing Kiev towards reserves, drones, and air defense. Overall, the piece frames Ukraine's future army as essential for Europe's security, but costly and also complex to maintain. Amish de Breton-Gordon argues in The Telegraph that Vladimir Putin is deliberately sabotaging peace efforts and has no intention of ending the war in Ukraine. The author dismisses Russian claims that Ukraine attacked Putin's residence as an obvious fabrication designed to mislead Washington. The article criticizes President Trump's optimism about near-complete peace talks, warning that his transactional approach misreads Putin's ideological goals. With Russian casualties soaring and military pressure mounting, the author urges firmness, not indulgence, to force Moscow towards genuine negotiations. In the Middle East, the Times of Israel reported Israel's decision to bar 37 international non-profit organizations from operating in Gaza and the West Bank, a move justified by Israeli officials as a security measure tied to new registration requirements. Now, the piece highlights the sharp tension between Israel's claim that aid delivery will continue unaffected and warnings from NGOs and foreign governments that the restrictions will deepen Gaza's humanitarian crisis. The Jerusalem Post reveals growing friction between Israel and Turkey over Gaza's future, revealing Israeli efforts to persuade the Trump administration to exclude Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan from the proposed Board of Peace. The report highlights Israel's broader push to block Turkish troops and also limit Ankara's role in Gaza's stabilization and reconstruction. Driven by fears of Turkish influence on the ground, the piece also underscores tensions between Israeli objections and Trump's publicly warm stance towards Erdogan, exposing unresolved fault lines within the emerging US-led peace framework. Palestine Chronicle argues that Gaza ceasefire is not real peace, but a pause in the fighting that benefits Israel. The piece, or the analysis, says that violence has slowed, but destruction and pressure on civilians continue. The piece also outlines three possible next steps: a failed international force, a return to full-scale war, or a tense stalemate with ongoing suffering. It also argues that Israel is pushing for control and displacement, while Palestinian groups refuse to disarm, making a lasting agreement unlikely. Regarding the Epstein files, the New York Times reported on the growing scale of the U.S. Justice Department's review of Jeffrey Epstein investigation files, now estimated at 5.2 million pages. The report highlights the logistical strain on the department, which is recruiting hundreds of lawyers to meet congressional disclosure demands while protecting victims and sensitive information. The piece also underscores political pressure on the Trump administration, delays past legal deadline, and mounting scrutiny over transparency, as only a fraction of the records has so far been released. We'll go back to the Wall Street Journal, which published an investigative report revisiting the moment Donald Trump cut ties with Jeffrey Epstein, which apparently centers around a 2003 complaint by an 18-year-old Mar-a-Lago spa worker who said Epstein pressured her for sex during a house call. The piece details how spa staff had long warned about Epstein's behavior and how the allegation prompted Trump to ban him from the club. While no police report was filed, the piece adds new texture to scrutiny of their relationship and the timeline of Trump's break with Epstein. More roundups and future outlooks. Politico reviewed President Trump's first year back in office, arguing that his push to brand himself as a global peacemaker has left a trail of unresolved crises heading into 2026. It actually details stalled efforts in Ukraine, a fragile Gaza ceasefire, rising tensions with Venezuela and Iran, and an uncertain thaw with China. The piece highlights a growing gap between Trump's foreign policy ambitions and voter concerns at home, suggesting geopolitics will continue to shadow his presidency into the new year. The Guardian offers a clear chart-led snapshot of the global economy heading into 2026, balancing cautious optimism with persistent risk. The explainer shows inflation easing and interest rates falling, but warns that growth is indeed slowing and remains vulnerable to shocks. The piece highlights uncertainty around AI-driven productivity, elevated trade tensions from Trump-era tariffs, fragile government finances, and rising unemployment. Overall, it argues that post-inflation era may feel more normal, yet far less stable than the pre-pandemic world. And we'll end with foreign policy, which highlights how global conflict intensified in 2025, using stark data to show the scale of violence and instability worldwide. The piece includes charts that show forced displacement reaching alarming levels, with more than 117 million people uprooted, underscoring how wars in places like Sudan, Gaza, and Ukraine are fueling long-term humanitarian crises. Another chart focuses indeed on soaring military spending, which hit a record high of $2.7 trillion, reflecting governments' growing reliance on hard power amid rising insecurity. The last chart here reveals the mounting dangers for journalists, with Gaza emerging as the deadliest conflict zone for media workers. Together, the figures point to a troubling trajectory. Conflict is spreading, becoming more costly and lethal, and placing civilians, aid workers, and journalists at increasing risk as the world heads into 2026. That's it from us today. Thanks for watching the Dailies, and Happy New Year to all of you. Goodbye.